representation in Massachusetts can be anywhere from $250 an hour, or in that range, to $500 or $600 an hour. And there is a lot of very fine legal talent at the lower end of the price scale. The divorces can be, $3,000 or $4,000 if everything is pretty much agreed to, or they can run into tens of thousands of dollars or even more if there's a lot to fight over and the parties want to fight over things, particularly if they're they're very wealthy people, or there's a lot of assets to divide, or there's a lot of disagreement over who's going to have custody and what the visitation is going to be, and all kinds of other peripheral issues come in to a divorce also. For example, restraining orders or various kinds of allegations of serious misconduct with the children that ends up making it more complicated and more expensive.
So you recently had a court victory in a restraining order case. What was so significant about this particular case?
I was very pleased with it. It was a domestic violence restraining order. The client was a law professor who had had a restraining order against him for 3 years, and he had been representing himself. He had never had he had actually never had an evidentiary hearing. I insisted on an evidentiary hearing when he contacted me and told me that his former wife was trying to make it a permanent restraining order, which would greatly impede his teaching ability. Schools will not have someone on their faculty who has a restraining order against them. All kinds of other jobs are unavailable to someone who has a restraining order against them. So, and of course it becomes a public record that's on police files and all kinds of other databases. It turns up at. It's a matter of public record. So when we insisted on a evidentiary hearing, the plaintiff's case pretty much collapsed, even though judges had bought into her story for 3 years. When she was actually on the stand and we had her children available to testify against her, to contradict what she was saying, it was a whole other story. When we found out that she considered my client's litigation of his continued litigation in post-divorce proceedings, she considered those post-divorce proceedings by him another form of abuse. And it became very clear that she was pushing the restraining order as sort of a retaliation against him for fighting too hard over things like property division and money in the divorce case. So, and that's of course been shown over and over again to affect domestic relations cases. At one level, you have domestic relations cases in the neighborhood courts, the district courts, the domestic relations cases are in the probate and family courts, but the domestic violence cases are in the neighborhood police courts, like the district courts, like here in Hingham District Court would have jurisdiction over domestic violence cases, while people would be fighting over their actual divorce in Plymouth and Brockton. So a spouse would go to the neighborhood court, bring an allegation of domestic violence to get leverage in the divorce. And we've seen that happen over and over and over again, and they get away with it. And I've literally made federal cases over this, and I think people are starting to realize it. Certainly it's been discussed enough in the media where now judges are on alert for cases that are exaggerated.
So having had experience with all the controversy surrounding such restraining orders, what are your general feelings about them and how they were used?
Well, I think there is a legitimate place for restraining orders because there is domestic violence that happens. But domestic violence is perpetrated by women against men as well as by men against women. At one point in time, USA Today did a very significant opinion survey, and it actually said that 57% of all men have been battered at one time or another by their spouses. 57%. I didn't go into what the degree of battering was, but it's happened. And of course, there's battering among gays and battering that goes on, by parents against children and vice versa, and this elder abuse. So, I mean, this does happen in our society, but when people are accused of it, they should have a fair hearing. They should have an opportunity to contest the accusations by bringing witnesses, by cross-examining complaining witnesses, by being able to introduce exhibits and perhaps testimony from other cases to show motive, to show contradictions, to show that there's reasons why the complaining victim should not be believed if, in fact, the person has some credibility problems and is exaggerating, because these false accusations do happen. They've been found out over and over again, and meanwhile, the damage is done. People lose jobs, people are thrown out of their homes, people aren't being able to see children. You can, for example, be put in jail for sending a Christmas card to a child when there's a restraining order against you. If the restraining order tells you to stay away and you try to see your kid because you really miss that child, you violate the restraining order, you're going to go to jail. And this is a really serious matter. If you're in the police force, you're going to be kicked off the police force. If you work in a hospital, you might be kicked out of that hospital. Your whole life can be turned inside out. You could be sleeping in a car because of a restraining order, because when you don't have your home and you have to support 2 residences, you might still have obligations to pay the mortgage for your spouse and the spouse's new significant other, for example. They may be living in your home, and you're going to have to pay their bills during the divorce. In the meantime, you have to support yourself, and it's too much for people. So they wind up homeless. And they wind up living near a subway vent somewhere. I mean, I've seen it happen. I know it happens. I know people who've lived in cars, lived in their parents' basement because they had restraining orders against them of dubious validity. Well, they may have been legally valid, but they were built on a foundation of lies. And if lawyers aren't there to expose those lies, the person suffers. And the judges have to be receptive and let people talk and let people have full due process in those restraining orders, and give them a hearing before they throw them out. And very often they throw people out without a hearing. And that's why I try to get federal courts to do something about it, because due process rights are still part of our Constitution, even if they're not followed.
So if someone's in a bitter divorce where it might be a restraining order might be unfairly taken out against them, what do you think they should do to prevent something like that from happening? Well,
the first thing is, if there's real violence or a potential of violence that's been going on, or a situation that is where it's a tinderbox, I wouldn't want to see my significant other without a witness with me. And I would try to spend as much time away from the home and away from him or her as possible so a situation doesn't happen. And you have to keep away, even if you miss that person or you feel you have something to say or you haven't had the last word, you keep away from someone who has the potential to take a restraining order against you. And you don't communicate with that person unless it's absolutely necessary, unless there's another witness involved. And you certainly do not use the children as pawns in any manner, because a lot of the problems with restraining order situations come about visiting, and the custodial parent will often withhold the child as leverage in divorce or to try to provoke an incident involving the restraining order. Very often, there's a vindictive person on one side who wants you to violate the restraining order, who will set you up, and this cases I've had over and over again, people are told, well, my girlfriend or my wife told me I could come by on another day other than my visiting day to pick up the kids, and then as soon as I got there she called the police and I was arrested. So people get set up to violate the restraining orders, and if it isn't in writing, if there isn't some kind of court order changing the restraining order, don't fall for it, because that no matter what you're told over the phone, if the restraining order is in place and you violate it and she feels like making up an accusation against you that you came against her permission, you're vulnerable. You could be arrested. You could do time.
So if one is filed against you, what should your next step be?
Well, if you're represented by counsel and you can afford to do it, you try to get that restraining order dissolved. You can file all kinds of motions for rehearings, motion to dissolve restraining order, but you've got to have your ducks in a row. You've got to have witnesses to show some kind of bad faith, some kind of ulterior motive. We were very lucky in the case I had in Newton that the opposing lawyer, I think, made a lot of strategic errors.